Welcome, you gamer ghouls and goblins out there. I'm your host for this video, GM Jared, and we are going to be giving 5 scary tips for making your game more horror. So stick around. Lightning and thunder, crackle, crackle, crackle. Hi everyone, it's GM Jared. I hope you like my spooktacular Halloween festive shirt sweater. I really have fun wearing this all season, all October season, and I sometimes wear it into like November, but like after a while it's Christmas, and you kind of have to stop because people look at you funny. Anywho, so you came here for 5 easy tips for how to make your game a little bit more scary and nefarious. So if you're trying to set a mood, right? So you're setting a mood, and you can have that one player who makes a joke and everyone laughs, and kind of the mood ends. That I've noticed that to be something normal. It's seemingly comedy is like the antithesis or the alternate to horror. And it's kind of what makes like great movies like Evil Dead, Cabin in the Woods. Those movies take that genre of mixing horror and comedy, and it becomes really fun. So tip number 5, we'll start on 5. Tip number 5. So this is an easy one. Silly horror houses. When I say that, we've all been to the hokey horror houses, right? So do the typical stuff you would see in those ghost hunter shows and stuff like that. Door slamming, stuff being moved. They leave a room, they come back into the room, all the chairs are piled up. We've all seen Poltergeist. If you haven't, go watch it. It's an amazing movie, especially for the season. Not the remake. That movie should be shot and burnt, but this isn't a movie review channel. They walk in, obviously setting it to where you want, and these kind of work in any situation. So even if you're doing let's say you're running a campaign, you're inspired by the old Universal, The Mummy, right? And you're like, oh, I would love to do kind of like a mummy pyramid haunted, the River King, been mummified, now it's going to come back and drain all the world's water. So they come into a room, they see sarcophagus, and they see hieroglyphics on the walls, and they see, urns and burial jars all over the place, right? They kind of go away and they make their perception checks and such, and then they leave the room. And then maybe they come back because they hear a sound. Maybe you have a sound go off in that room. So they're walking down the corridor, and you're like, oh, from behind you hear a sound. It sounds like something got knocked over. One of those urns might have been knocked over. So they all rush back to the room, and the sarcophagus is open, and every urn in the room has been piled into the sarcophagus. The sarcophagus is empty. Maybe they've checked it before and they knew it was empty. Now it's open and all the urns are in there. Suddenly your players are like, wow, that's creepy. I'm going to look around. You could do the same thing with a house, right? Like your haunted house scenario. They go into a room, and it's even creepier when you get like kid stuff involved, like dolls and stuff like that. They go into a room, nothing's there. They go to leave the room. The door slams shut behind them. That's typical haunted house stuff, like I'm saying, your generic, silly haunted house stuff. Door slams shut behind them. They turn around, they're like, was it trapped? I'm going to go check. They open the door, and there's now all the dolls are arranged in a circle or a pattern or something that's important in your world, or you want to build lore around. And that is kind of how you set the stage. Next one, number 4. So number 4 is a fun one. Number 4 is lore and creepiness, and you can use everything to make it creepy. And you're like, idiot, Jared, this should have been 5. It's worse than 5. So what I mean is, you set the stage, and maybe you have a Frankenstein and a Frankenstein monster. So they come into a room, and they don't see anything. It's a medical office, right? So there's papers and stuff, and they go through all the papers, and they start to read the papers. And this one takes a little bit more work on your end as the GM. And you can either hand them a note, and maybe if you're playing online, you could shoot them like a PDF. Or if you're in person, you hand them a note, and it's like the journals. And then the journals the first page, it's normal. Like maybe the first paragraph looks normal handwriting. The second paragraph starts to look more mad, right? Like the scribblings. And then the third, it's just the knocking. I hear the knocking. It's always the knocking. Why can't I get past that? And the people are like, wow, that's creepy. And then they keep going, and then they go into another room, and in this room, they just see all scrawled all over the walls is knocking, the knocking. And you're like, what is this knocking sound? And that on top of, you know, having things move and the ghost, you kind of start to set this level of horror, right? And that's kind of what you want to do. It's again, you're going to have people make jokes, and that's normal. So don't be offended. If people are making jokes at the scenario, and kind of like trying to alleviate the tension, that's normal, and you're doing a good job with that. Number 3, senses. Use the 5 senses. Use your senses. You walk into a room, you smell a pungent odor of decay. You see you are walking down the hall and you feel someone squeeze your hand. Make a perception check. You don't see anything. It's a ghost, right? It's ghost. I detect magic. You detect necromancy. Okay, cool. What's giving it off? You know, stuff like that. Your players are going to use their abilities, and you have to build on that. You detect necromancy as well as divination, or evocation, or transmutation, conjuration. These are important ones. And you can build with the senses, even the detect magic. Be like, oh, it's fuzzy, but you get this, or you see this. You see a rotting corpse in the corner, and then it just rots away very quickly. It's hard to build tension, especially when you're doing your typical like body horror stuff. Body horror isn't really scary; it's just gross and gruesome. So I'm gonna try and I would avoid body horror. It helps. Now, if you can do body horror as part of the senses, you see something, but I like to do like corner shadows, stuff moving in the shadows. I don't use, like, you could use shadows as enemies, but it's way more fun to, as you walk down the hallway, it looks like the pictures are all looking at you. You know, they all have that weird effect where they follow you with their eyes, and everyone's like, I've had that. You know, you want to use experiences your players have probably had, or have had that feeling, or maybe you get a eerie sense of deja vu. Like when the wizard goes to cast detect magic, be like, oh, you have a weird sense of deja vu, like you've done this before. It's very strange. You detect divination and necromancy, and they're like, okay, what was the deja vu about? Be like, well, it's that feeling of deja vu. You've done this before, or you like you've been in this scenario before. And they're like, whoa, that's creepy. Okay, you know, and stuff like that. It's you want to build on your senses. You smell copper. Copper is blood. A lot of times you walk into a room, you smell a heavy sense of copper. It's that irony, coppery smell. And like, okay, I get that. Okay, on to number 2. Number 2 is a little harder, and they start to, if you start to use them all together, it works itself out. Number 2 is bringing in props. And this one's a little harder, especially if you work online. But online, you can find easy props and images to help kind of enhance your abilities. And so when I was saying in 3, you want to use the senses. Number 2 is props, right? So these are more tangible. Senses is like you see something in the game, you describe it. Number 2 is props. So if you're in person, you can give everyone like, oh, you slept the night before, and you wake up and everyone finds a playing card or a tarot card or something, right? Everyone wakes up with a specific bone from a hand, and people like, that's weird. And you can give them, you know, like little like bones, or like plasticky bones, or everyone wakes up with a dice, a specific dice, and it's maybe their character's hit point die. And they're like, well, what does this do? And as they go, the dice, again, this is go back to lore building. So each one of these you build upon, right? So the lore building is maybe dice had something to do. Maybe this ghost, maybe this person, maybe someone in the family was murdered due to a gambling debt. And now they have dice. So everyone wakes up with dice, and suddenly you're like, what's going on? So you give everyone a die, and then maybe they come into a room and you're like, roll the dice. Like, character with the D8, please roll the die. They roll the die, and you look down your loads. Oh, okay. And then you could be like, oh, minus 10 silver, 5 gold, whatever, a small amount off the character. And and you have a vision of your character playing gambling, and suddenly you're so melancholy because you remember you needed to spend this money on food for your family, but you just gambled it away. And that vision goes away as quickly as it came upon you. And yep, now you're just kind of chilling in the room, and your character loses 5 silver. Now, early on, obviously make it manageable. I'm talking about 5 silver in a campaign where your character is a 5th level, 6th level, right? 5 silver doesn't really hurt them. If you're doing this at earlier levels, you could be like, you lose 2 silver, or two copper pieces, 3 copper pieces. And suddenly the player's like, oh man, that's part of the lore. And you're building on that lore, that horror lore, that lore of like sadness and what are we dealing with here? But also they roll it and you take the die away. And now they actually lost that die. And the character no longer has the die, it just evaporates. And other players are like, oh shit, like what? And like what's gonna happen when we go into different rooms? And also, this also makes your players want to explore the world you're building, because suddenly they're like, oh, I'm involved, I want to explore. So you're building this tension, you're building this lore, and you're adding these horror elements to it. Maybe they get attacked, they walk into a room, maybe a character walks into a room and they get attacked, and you're like, roll a d4, and the character with the d4 roll the d4, and they roll it, and you have something happen there, and that's the room where they were murdered. And now your hand moves as if something's controlling it, and you lift the carpet and you find a blood stain, and you're like, oh man, that's where they died. Like, I see it now, like it's all coming together. It builds this tension, but it also creates this drama. And also, if you could get them to Scooby-Doo, where they all search every which direction, that's kind of what you want. And number one, this is again building on the stuff we've already had. Lore is important. We talked about that. Props, that's cool. You don't have to go super expensive. Not all of us have $1 million budget with the props. That's so if you're using dice, maybe you can use coins, stuff like that. Stuff you might have laying around the house. And if you're online, it's even easier. You find an image and you just send it to each one of your players. So for number one, this one's a little harder, and this one I feel like if you've built enough, it works. Your main villains, or the villains, or the environment that you're dealing with, doing strange things. And this one's a little harder, right? And I talk about this in some of my other videos. Having the environment, having the villain have abilities that aren't normal per the game. This is hard because you might overbalance it, and suddenly your players are in a world of hurt. You might underbalance it and the players think it's wonky. So this one's a little fun. So maybe they come into a room and they see eldritch symbols light up, and then there's the big entity that they have to fight, and they see these symbols, and they saw these symbols before, because again, your world building, and maybe each one of them had a symbol specifically when they woke up as per the props. And now you're like, oh wait, maybe the symbols have something to do with the fight. Combat ensues, you roll initiative, and then you have a player run up, and maybe a player goes down, and then all of a sudden where their symbol is, there's now a picture of that player, and with that horrid face, like looking distressed and feared, as all of a sudden the player goes to cast stabilize, right? Boop, stabilize, or healing word, and you're like, okay, roll. Your character reaches stabilized or healing word, it works, but they don't get back up, and the player's like, wait, what do you mean And like, nope, they don't get back up. Now the players are going to be like, oh man, it's in the painting. We have to figure out how to stop the painting. They're part of the painting. We have to defeat this monster, but we're fighting the monster. You know, that stuff like that. You can make your environment, you can make your enemies do weird stuff. Maybe they melt into the floor and then they appear somewhere else, or they melt into the floor. And what was that? Monster house. Like literally the whole house became the monster and they were inside the house. And then, you know, they realized, oh, the chandelier was a uvula and the tongue was the carpet and the door entranceway was the mouth. You could do something like that where suddenly they had all this horror stuff build up, and then boom, it's the house. The house is out to get them. They have to escape the house because they're literally in the belly of the beast, and they have to get out. So that's the last one. Make your final encounter, the number one, make your final encounter memorable, as well as something that the players have to think about. It's not just flat hard, like with building tension, and what builds the most tension is all of a sudden your players realize this enemy isn't just a bag of hit points. It's the wizard can't cast fireball at 8th level to get rid of this big bad. Something else has to happen for you to win. And that makes things terrifying because the players, once they figure it out, become more invested in the combat, become more invested in what's going on. Also, they start to panic. And then if you built everything up from 5 to 1, suddenly you have this, like, that's the crescendo, right? So you watch your old horror movies. Most of the time, there's the crescendo where the final character, in horror, it's known as the final girl, is fighting the big bad, Jason or Freddy or Michael Myers, right? Or in Hellraiser, for the Pinhead, they're dealing with that. There's always the big bad at the end, the final encounter. So you had all that build up to the final encounter, and then boom, final encounter, something interesting is happening other than the enemy is a big bag of hit points. So hopefully these have worked out. Hopefully you like them. Let me know if you try them. Let me know if you like my little Halloween shirt, little Halloween sweater here in the comments down below. And hopefully all you ghouls and goblins out there enjoy this Halloween season. Enjoy this season of fear and fun. So from all of us here at Nothing Ventured, Nothing Gained, we love rolling dice, giving advice with a little bit of that New York spice. See you later.